Welcome back to a brand new episode of Full Metal RPG. I'm your host, Brendan Carrion, and today I'm joined by Ashley. What up? How you doing?
Hello, I'm good. It's not my normal morning, so I've switched to alcohol instead of coffee. So recording at
Ooh,
night is good.
oh, very nice, very nice. I'm teetotaling for a minute, so
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it's caught up with me. It's caught up with me. Gotta lose them cows. And Richard, you're here as well, buddy. Welcome. What up? What do you got?
Water.
Yeah.
I was going to pretend it was gin, but or some other.
I also brought a delicious water. A delicious water made to taste like grapefruits.
Well, I'm recovering from my post second shot thing, so I'm over the hump.
Oh, buddy.
But I'm going to keep it on the level for just a little bit longer to make sure that I didn't feed those flu-like symptoms I had for 24 hours, and it didn't knock me on my ass, but I wasn't feeling the best, But
I slept for like the whole day after my second one.
2 weeks till axe throwing, everybody. 2 weeks. We're doing axe throwing in 2 weeks.
Oh yeah. Full Metal RPG axe throwing in 2 weeks.
Yes.
I think everybody at Full Metal RPG is feeling a little bit like a need for recovery. I mean, is it just me, or are we up to our gills and projects? Is it just me, or are we all?
So many projects.
I feel like the whole Full Metal RPG team is just firing on all cylinders, doing so much stuff. We've got Rot Marches. We got Star Breach Challenge. We've got our other podcasts that we do. We have no time to sleep. We had Mother's Day yesterday, which is why we're here on a Monday evening and not a Sunday morning. And I don't know. I'm dog tired. I feel like maybe there's a tired energy just in the air, but we're going to fucking do a show. We're going to do a show. Episode
Hell
115 of Full Metal RPG. Now, this is a part of the show where we usually do some Patreon shout-outs, and today we're going to do a really special one because I was actually put on blast by my friend, my player, Brinton.
Oh.
He said, "You didn't shout me out." And I said, "I did. You're just behind on your episodes." And he says, "Well, when I get to it, I'll know that you did, but I didn't hear it." And I say, "Well, so now I'm just going to go, Brinton. Thank you so much for your Patreon pledge.
Yes.
I love you. You're a wonderful person. Brinton Williams is a great person. He's a great game designer, and he's a wonderful player in my Esoteric Enterprises game. Brinton, this episode goes out to you, the entire episode.
Executive produced by Brenton. Executive produced.
It's for you. It's for you, my friend. Never let it be said. Never let it be said that I forgot about you, Brinton. Never let it be said. All right, so it's been a fucking hot minute since I've been on the show. I'm stoked as fuck to get into it with you guys. Let's do some fucking black hole. What do you think?
Yes.
Black hole.
All right. Well, the black hole is the ever-sucking void that takes up all of our time, energy, and attention. It is role-playing, the greatest of hobbies. Richard, what's going on with you, man? What have you been up to? Anything good?
I've been. It's been kind of a steady state. What with all the new projects going on. I mean, I did run a Rot Marches game, which was rad.
Yeah.
You played in
fun.
it. You played in it. I think that wasn't the first time you played under my my game mastership, but
that's true. I played Apocalypse World with you once.
Apocalypse World and the superhero game, Defend the Block, not Defend the Block, but
Defend the Street.
Defend the Street. Yeah.
Defend the Block.
Yeah, and that was a lot of fun. I really had to. I'm a little rusty from not running con games, or at least even being in that con mode where I had to kind of like bring myself, like I had a plan. Like we talked about a little bit in the last episode about story structure, and I had to kind of reel myself back in that game. So that was to try and fit things in, and it was a lot of fun to be thinking on my feet and trying to like fit everything in and do the little dance. And we had a little travel sequence in there, so it'll come in to our topic a little bit later in the show. But other than that, it's like I'm still playing my game with my college buddies for Eberron,
Yeah, the Eberron game. I thought you were gonna go right to 13th Age, but this is Eberron. So
Yeah.
tell me what's going on in Eberron, dude.
Well, we found one of the weird things, and I actually really like about Eberron, is apparently the goblinoids were kind of the precursor race. Unlike normally, it's like elves. Elves were the precursor race before man. The goblins and hobgoblins, all that, were kind of a cultural thing. They actually built things, and we're on this path to try to deliver a letter to a dragon, but from a wizard who wants the dragon to move so it quits screwing with his observatory, his magical observatory. He wants this dragon to get out of his mountain so he can, I'm assuming we're all dead one way or another. I mean, there'll probably be a twist in some way, but the dragon be like, no, you go back there and kill him. We're not going to kill him, kill the dragon.
It wouldn't be much of a story if the dragon just said, sure.
Yeah.
That seems eminently reasonable. I'm getting the fuck out.
Right.
You know what? He makes some strong points.
Strong points. And we stumbled across a kind of shortcut up the mountain that is actually a goblin kind of underhive that's abandoned. And we found a sealed ancient one that was leaking moss all through the place. And then we kind of got attacked by pygmy moss people. So that was, they were vicious little buggers. And
Sounds like you guys are having a good time with it. Sounds really Eberron-y. I dig it.
Yeah.
I dig the fuck out of it.
Having a lot of fun, and we're still playing 13th Age. That's with my high school buddies. So I'm kind of reconnecting with everybody, but online still. So doing 13th Age, I think we're 2 or 3 sessions from being finished. I think we're clicking in with the system. Combat is not taking as long as it was because we're not really used to those F20 style combats anymore, and we finally got those nailed down. And my barbarian isn't hitting the floor every combat, maybe every other combat. So, but he had a rage off against a demon who was a frenzy demon who was frenzying, and he was raging at the same time. So we were having a frenzy off. That was a lot of fun. Yeah, that's pretty much about it. I haven't done a Buzzkill's bookshelf in a week or so, and I'm feeling the itch to go back to that. So I need to read some books and get up there and get up on
Playing
the
a lot of
YouTubes again.
games.
Yeah,
that's good. You know, that's the life, right? Playing the RPG games. Can't talk about RPGs if you don't play RPGs, right?
that's right.
It's good on you, man. Good on you. Staying busy. I dig it. Ashley, what you got? What's the hotness?
Well, first of all, I'm doing the Starbreeze Challenge, and it's my first anything with miniature war games. So this is my dwarf army.
Wow.
I'm really excited.
Hell yeah.
They're primed and ready to paint, and I'm very excited about that. My space dwarf Jedi army. So that's been part of it, is just reading through the book for that and getting my miniatures built, because these are IKEA. You have to build your own minis. Apparently, I'm used to the D&D ones where they come pre-done, and it's oh, I have to paint all these. No, these ones you have to build them and then paint them. So yeah.
Isn't it fun though? Isn't it an enjoyable pastime, gluing on the little arms?
Yes, and picking out what goes with what, and then kind of modding the weapons to be, well, this is an axe, but he needs a training rod. So if I cut this off, it's now a training rod instead of an axe. So that's been a lot of fun to do. So there's that. Yukon Dark, the Tiny Cthulhu game I'm playing with Alan and some other folks. That we just finished episode 6 last week, which we're halfway through our 12-week thing we're planning on doing. It's getting really fucking creepy. Maddie's she's an amazing GM, so it's getting creepy. I'm excited about that. This week is going to be a Q&A session with the cast, so we're just going to get on and do a mid-season break, I guess, then do a Q&A session. Pathfinder 1 and 2, I damn near died in both of those campaigns this week.
Oh.
And it's the same GM, so I'm did I piss you off? It's my roommate. I'm did I eat the last cookie and not tell you? Or what's going on? If you don't want me in your campaigns, just tell me. So yeah, and I really thought that if I was going to die in one of the campaigns, it would be Pathfinder 2, since the difficulty's so much higher on that. But yeah, no, I almost died in both of those campaigns this week. So it's been quite the exciting week for gaming for me.
Yeah, no kidding. Sounds like you're getting in a lot of games, a lot of hours at the game table, not games at the hour table. different
Why
things.
not both? Yeah.
Yeah, no, it sounds like you're getting some reps. Good. I wanted to kind of talk about a game that's been kind of tantalizing me. Unfortunately, I don't know when I'm going to get to play it, but I definitely feel like pretty hot and bothered by this game. It's called Jackals. Have you guys heard of Jackals?
No. Tell us more.
It's really interesting. I kind of became aware of this game from the homie Jamie at Coliseum Rex via his RPG podcast that he does with our friend Henry. It's called Human Energy Field, and you can find that very easily. Just type in Human Energy Field into iTunes. They have a lot of hot takes over there, and they're very spicy. They do
indeed.
Takes.
They do indeed. I'm not quite caught up yet, but
oh yeah, let me tell you, there's some doozies. I feel like we should. I'd like to have them on so
Absolutely.
we can do a little bit of the old back and forth, because I mean they're very smart guys. Jamie and Henry are super smart dudes, very articulate and well read, and they know their games. I don't agree with everything they say, but that is the essence of savory discussion. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I mean, it's like that's what makes it all worthwhile. If it's everybody's just like, oh yeah, I agree, that's not very interesting. So I love listening to that podcast. And Jamie put me onto this game. Apparently, Osprey, who has done, they've been kind of changing their model over the last 10 years, right? Like everybody who's spent any time in like a kind of crusty RPG store knows that Osprey sells these like these little army books that tell you about like uniforms from like every war in every era in every part of the world.
Well, they've got like more than that. They've got like vehicle guides. They've got like all this like real world history in little booklets that you can buy. Yeah. I have 2 SR-71 books on my shelf because that's my favorite.
SR-71 Blackbird?
Yeah, those are my favorite. That's my favorite plane. So like I have 2 of them.
Hey! No, that's great. That's my favorite plane too. But Osprey's good for that kind of shit, like war nerd type shit, right? And then they decided they want to start moving into miniatures games, and they started using that kind of perfect bound, about 64-page format to put out miniatures war games, like one-shots that didn't have expansions or anything, just completely self-contained games. And they did okay with some that they released. Ash Barker's Last Days is on there. I think Frostgrave is one of them. Gaslands. These are all Osprey games.
Gaslands is fucking badass.
So they kind of blew up doing that. And then very recently they started moving into RPGs. And this is very interesting, right? It's because their sort of design aesthetic, like what they value from an RPG, is very different than a lot of the other game companies that are out there. And so Jackals is from Osprey. Cut into the chase, Jackals is from Osprey. And it is such a dope-ass little game. It is so fucking cool. The conceit of it is it's like D&D, only instead of being part of some kind of mythological, like Western Europe in the Middle Ages, you are mythological Grecian era antiquity. And so there's like fantasy Trojan dudes walking around, and fantasy Israelites walking around, and fantasy Egyptians walking around, and fantasy kind of like Bedouin tribes wandering around. And then you have adventures, and there's like demons and undead and gnolls and shit, and it's fucking so cool. It's just a really cool little game, and it's got like a percentile system, but they're selling you a setting. So there's like a setting that has a meta plot, and then there's gonna be a series of campaign books that are coming out for it, and there's like a map and like what's going on over here and what's going on over there, and it's just really cool and immersive. And I personally, I think a lot of history nerds that role play, we like get caught up in like you get caught up in the Middle Ages, but then like antiquity like doesn't seem to have the same kind of like draw in terms of like RPG creators. You'll see like Cthulhu Rome, or or they'll do like a Vampire the Masquerade book about Rome, but there'll only be one. And it's just really cool to find a game that has such a like robust interaction with this idea on kind of like a mythological level. So you can really just play this kind of fantastical stuff with the same sort of disconnection from the actual history of the era. You know what I'm saying? But you get these kind of like tropey, kind of like you know, the kind of like eyeliner dudes from not Egypt, you know, and they've got the Trojan hats from not Troy, you know what I'm saying? Yeah, this is cool as fuck. And then you go fight a skeleton and a gnoll, and you're like, neat. It's neat. I don't know. I'm tickled.
Well, that sounds awesome. Like, you know, all that stuff, all the stuff that, you know, Gygax didn't steal from like all the novels he was reading. He was stealing from all the ancient myths he knew about. So like, it all comes from somewhere, and just playing in the historical setting, I find that fascinating, especially if like everything kind of stays on a level in the city, or like you have to go someplace like it's a normal world and then there's fantastic out there somewhere.
Yeah, it's a very humanocentric world. It doesn't seem like there's a lot of elves and stuff. It's mostly about kind of like, well, there were gnolls, and then what is essentially kind of almost like chaos demons or something. It seems kind of a little bit Warhammer winking, where there's like this idea of these ruinous powers that were kind of running everything. But instead of having beastmen that were like goat-headed dudes as their minions, it was gnolls. And then just very recently, the humans have kind of banded together and kicked out the gnolls. But now the humans are having like trouble kind of like dealing with each other, you know? But it ain't like the gnolls are gone. They're just kind of like over there a little bit. So you play jackals, which is their word for adventurers, which is... You go to a town and there's maybe some like caves or some like temples or something that might have some like residual fuckery going on in it, and you go help them sort that out. But then they kind of don't like you anymore once you're done sorting it out. They're kind of like, oh, these are people who we need around for a minute, but we don't want around for a long time, and so you got to keep moving. So it's a sick little game, and I'm kind of actually stoked as fuck to look at these other games that Osprey's putting out, because I think that there might be like a really high quality there. So thank you to Jamie for putting me onto that. Check out Jackals. Check out Jackals.
Sweet.
Yeah, great. So now we got a show. We're gonna do a show today, and who wants to introduce this topic? Is it my understanding that this is Ashley's topic? That this is This
wasn't my topic. I went through the spreadsheet when we were like, what are we gonna do? I went through the spreadsheet.
Ye old spreadsheetville. All right, great.
Yes, I scrolled it out.
All right, well,
I can introduce it if you want, but it wasn't.
Why don't you? Lay it on me, Stream B, what you got?
Cool. All right. So basically what we're going to be talking about is, you know, when you're playing a game and you have to go from one town to the next town. So there's going to be travel involved. And how do you handle that to make it still fun? How do you handle in-game travel sequences? So, Richard, I know you talked about in your rot marches, you said that there was a travel montage.
Well, it wasn't a montage. It was so you can deal with travel many ways, especially in fantasy, where you're, you know, in this particular instance, I had rolled up a specific, it had an encounter table, and I rolled up an encounter along the way. And that encounter happened to be a couple of corpses. It wasn't dangerous. It was just interesting. It was just world building. So, and then I rolled up what was on those corpses to kind of build more world. So I used it as an opportunity to build a world. And I think that's one of the best ways you can use a travel sequence. I'm often torn on the idea of travel sequences, because I tend to like to run a more modern game or more sci-fi game, and travel a lot of times isn't interesting in those unless that's the thing. It's like the road trip movie is a thing, you know, but like oftentimes you'll just see the investigators go from the crime scene to their lab, just a split, like. So, but
travel gets kind of hand wavy the more modern the game becomes.
Right.
You know, you can hand wave it in fantasy too, but then there are usually much more robust mechanics if somebody wishes to delve into that. I'm sorry, go ahead, Ashley, you were saying?
Oh, no worries, that's fine. I think one of the ways that in the people that I play with, because we're all theater nerds, we like to use travel sequences for RPing. So we'll role play like interactions with the characters. So you were talking about if you roll up random encounters, that builds the world, which I think is fantastic because the more robust you can make the world and the more things that are going on in the world, the better it ends up being, in my opinion. But if you can kind of role play and form those connections, that's another form of world building that's just tightening the bonds between the party members. So, and I think you can do that no matter what the setting is. If it's fantasy, if it's, cyberpunk, anything like that, the characters are still going to have backstories and they're still going to have ties to each other.
Well, absolutely. And one of the things I really like that's in Savage Worlds, I think it's been in since the very beginning, it's an optional rule called interludes, where those that want to participate, you draw a card off the deck, because that's one of those things about Savage Worlds is you have the initiative deck, the action deck at the table. You draw a card and it kind of tells you, hey, the suit will tell you, hey, tell me about an obstacle you came during the travels, or tell me a part of your backstory that was a happy part of your backstory or a sad part of your backstory or whatever. Or, it's got like 3 different things. Downtime, like tell me about like what your downtime looked like between these 2 things, between sessions, or you could use an interlude between sessions or between adventures as kind of like how you got to place. It's one of the things I like about the Savage Worlds thing. And then you get a benefit, a Benny, if you do the thing right. That's one of the things about Savage Worlds is all about them bennies, right? All about those treats. And I know that's not everybody's thing, but like I really like the idea of like incentivizing characters with in-game currency to play their character. It's just a little carrot for the stick of my combat encounter that's coming your way.
Right.
So.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that I lost my thought. Yeah, the role playing, I think it depends on who's at your table. That's what I was going to say.
Right. Yeah.
Much like anything, and I've said this, I mean, if you tally up all of the phrases I've used over all of the episodes I've been on, it depends on who is at your table is probably like my most used phrase, because it does. I mean, there are some people who don't want to do the role playing. They don't want to do the, bullshit side stuff. They want to get to where they're going and either get into combat or whatever it is that they're getting to. And that's when it gets kind of hand wavy. So there's that option.
So kind of tell me for a second, if you will, Ashley, what's it look like one of these like travel RP like encounters? Like what does it look like? What does it feel like? Like how many people are involved? Like what kind of gets done? Because we used to do stuff kind of like this in Vampire, right? Because Vampire, if you start off playing in the Middle Ages and stuff, becomes very travel oriented. But then the more you get into the contemporary times, it's like it's on an airplane or whatever, right? But if you'll have these whole sessions that'll be like, okay, well you're on a ship for 3 months or something. What do you do while you're on the ship? And nobody wants to fucking role play being on a ship for 3 months. That sounds fucking heinous. I don't know what anybody did before when they had to do that. Right. So as a storyteller, I would sometimes be like, well, is there anything you want to get done? And then I would maybe have a couple things that I had like preceded, like so-and-so comes up to you and tries to have this conversation. And at that point, it's like bait that they maybe take, maybe they don't. So what does it look like when you do it? With
role-playing amongst the players, are there any connections that you formed? Because this is kind of like PBTA, when you look at the threads on how you know the different people, kind of expand upon that. I have a friend that I've been in a couple campaigns with, and we always know each other from the before times, like some way, whether it's she was a barbarian and I was a healer, and so she would always come to me when she needed healing or whatever. So that type of stuff is fun because as we play it out, the other players can kind of see the bond that we've formed. Or if there's someone that you're from the same town but you don't know each other, it's just you get into conversations about what it was like from back home and things like that. So it's literally just acting out your backstory a little bit. What would it be like if you were really in a carriage with these people for a day? don't make it last a day, but just little kind of snapshots of conversations and things like that you have while you're on the road.
Okay, so it's kind of picaresque, kind of like almost. I'm imagining kind of like a little bit of a kind of a provincial sort of vibe to it, like in terms of its feel.
Yeah, like a slice of lifey type.
Sure.
Like, yeah. And again, theater nerds. I play with theater nerds almost exclusively. There's one campaign I'm in where not everyone is into that, so that one gets very roll up random encounters and see what we can find that'll help us out later. But there's one in particular that everyone has a background in theater. So that campaign, we really like the opportunities to role play. So travel sequences are a good way to do that.
I've noticed that, like, in those vampire games I was talking about, like in the early stuff, when everybody is still playing a bunch of like hardened orphans that don't, like, I don't talk to anybody, and there's like a bunch of that shit. And then the more that the campaign goes on and the longer the characters have to kind of know each other and the more kind of shared experiences they have, the more open people become to having those type of role-playing encounters. But I do think that the thing that you're describing is almost like, it's almost an element of like new style role-playing. Like, I don't know, like, I really feel like if in like 1995 somebody had been like, we'd been playing Vampire the Masquerade and we were like, let's just do a scene where everybody's like sitting around a table talking about our pasts. I would have been like, shut the fuck up. I'm gonna go attack a werewolf. You know what I'm saying? I mean, I was also a child, so I don't know. I mean, you know, there's a lot of different ways to cut that. What do you think?
It depends on who you're playing with. Also, like I said, there are some tables that do not want that shit. So,
there is that. There's a certain kind of emotional vulnerability that comes from playing that way.
Yeah.
You know, from inhabiting your character in that way, and not everybody is necessarily like savors that experience or is particularly ready for it. You know what I'm saying? And that's not a pejorative thing. That's not being like, why aren't you ready for it? It's just like, you know. Maybe you don't want to dig deep while you're role-playing. Maybe you want to fucking kill a warg, you know?
I just want to escape and just go and, like, hit this with my short sword enough times until it explodes. Like, that's it. Yeah. And that's absolutely valid and fine, too, for sure. Sure.
It's all good.
I mean, the game master has to kind of give space for that. They have to be into it, too. It's one of those things where, like, the game master has to, like, somewhat set some of this stuff up on how they want to deal with it. And if they have a table of theater nerds, like they know after a while, it's like, well, I don't even have to do anything this session. I'm just gonna work on the notes for the next session while you guys talk about.
Session where you like bust out your phone and you're like, wonder what's on eBay. Let these guys do whatever they're doing.
Yes.
But yeah, it's like. I really like using it to build the world, you know, showing things in the distance, talking about the terrain, or giving you a sense that you're in a place, and then allowing space. And if nobody takes up that space to roleplay, then the crickets go on, or whatever, the sound of the ocean or whatever it is. And then we just keep moving, and you got to keep these things moving. You can't just like try.
Right, you can't dwell on them. You can't suddenly just be like have it descend into a series of postcards, right? I mean, like all of these games descend from Tolkien and The Hobbit in particular, and perhaps to a greater lesser extent, The Lord of the Rings. I don't really remember quite as well. There's an element of travel log to those books. And even if you are getting into like classic horror fiction, Dracula is in and of itself a travel log.
Yes, absolutely.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
There's just pages and pages of, I'm sitting on the train and I'm looking at the trees. And this is kind of nice. I find it to be immersive. I indulge in some of that when I am doing Vampire in particular. I'd say, Richard, your travel sequence was very immersive. In fact, of that game, I would say it was the highlight of my personal experience. Because it did seem very vivid. It was very interesting to me because since we're all building this shared sandbox world, we sort of like hand off to each other, you know, when it's time to run. Being like, oh shit, look at all this shit that's here that I didn't have any idea was here, but now it is, and it's pretty cool, you know. And immediately that gets my head kind of thinking, well, what can I do with this later? You know what I'm saying? It's neat stuff.
Yeah, and that was kind of like because I was sort of feeding off. You know, when you run, you're very descriptive about the environment. And I have been in the past accused of kind of being very minimalist until people ask me of things. So I was like, I was just feeding off that idea, and I had this image in my head that I really wanted to show everybody, because it's one of these fascinating things that in our real world, there are ship graveyards that people like literally cut ships apart to recycle them, but they're in like Pakistan, and there's these big flat beaches where all these ships are being cut apart and like recycled. And I was just like, well, clearly if you had a big war and the invaders like won and stayed, you would have all these ships you would want to recycle. So like I love the idea of all these the prisoners were recycling. They were taking apart these big logs from the ship to build other things with, and or whatever.
That's fucking awesome. And then there was a monster in the distance when we were kind of setting our watches. There was a monster in the distance, and that was, I mean, I think that's an old saw. I've used it, but the experience of it as a player was much more different, and I was like, ugh, what I'm saying? It was very intriguing. I still am intrigued by that fucking monster in the distance thing, honestly.
And I was that was inspired by looking at the bestiary in the back of Morkborg and seeing that there are giant beasts in there already, and I was like, well, clearly there's some big things in this place. We just haven't talked about it yet. And as things escalate, as showing showing badness, going back to the PBTA moves, like showing future badness, like I don't necessarily have to bring that to the fore anytime soon or ever again. Just showing that there's something bigger in this world was really quite enjoyable, because I could tell that everybody's like, oh shit, is it coming our way?
Yeah, you're always going to have that right at the back of your head, just like, where is it? What is it doing right now? When you've got that kind of doomsday counter going, like potentially.
Right. Yeah. So go ahead.
I was going to say, to kind of change direction just a little bit, because I think that we all, as a group, we kind of have we all have some different takes where we've approached the same thing, but I think it sounds like, we're all birds of a feather here. We all kind of like similar things. But let me ask you this. Have you ever played in a game that was very oriented on the mechanics of travel and the process of resource management? Because that's a completely different GM take. We were talking earlier about how a lot of this comes down to GM preference. And so have you ever role-played with a GM who was like, how much can you carry? How much water do you have? How many days of hardtack do you have? What's your pace on the road? Do you stop to find a stream? You know what I'm saying? Have you ever done this?
Not to that extent. My GM will make us track rations, and it's like, okay, if you're traveling for 4 days, mark off 4 rations unless you go out and you try and find something. And that brings it into world building and what you're doing during travel. Do you go out to try and find food so you don't have to use your rations, stuff like that? But if we don't do that, then we have to mark off our rations. As far as whatever, it's not overbearing is not the word I want, but where if you are like burdened, like overburdened.
Oh, encumbrance.
Encumbrance, yes. That if you are a gnome, you are not going to be able to carry like 7 broad great swords or whatever. Like, there are certain things that if it's ridiculous, he doesn't allow it, but it's not one of those where you can specifically carry 100 pounds and you have to mark off what it is you have. So he doesn't do that, but which would be a pain in the ass.
I mean, well, I think this kind of gets into one of our other questions, which is like, it sounds fun until you do it. And then maybe it's fun for like the first couple sessions, and then it just becomes this huge pain in the ass that sort of interposes itself between you and the story. Like somebody, I can't remember who brought it up. I think it was Paul, and he was like having different languages in your game. and making it possible in character creation for there to be a non-shared language, right? Like no one in the group, all 100% of the group does not share a language,
Right.
and then you're like, oh, cool. There's to be all these barriers between like communication, and then like 3 sessions in, you're like, okay, fuck it, everybody knows common. Let's just get through this shit. You know what I'm saying? So,
for
what are your
4 or
thoughts?
5 minutes for fun, like that's kind of that's kind of I think been the real my real experience. It has been like none of the game masters took the resource management thing seriously for long enough. Like there's always like the one session, or like they're really interested for one session or whatever, or it was really cool when we were playing because when we were playing the AP for Rot Marches, like because we were such a low level, like high fantasy but high grit game, that having to keep track of that stuff was actually like it added to the tension of the idea. Like, but most D&D is played at this like high fantasy level where it's often kind of like, is it really fun? And then you get to like level 3 and you can make food or whatever, create food, and the rogue is the ranger is always out like hunting animals, and they can just get whatever they want, and it just becomes like, why bother? Because the characters are so powerful, they are superheroes. They can just bring things into existence, and that's it. Like
Yeah, and kind of like, what element of role playing? I mean, this is the question. Like, what the percentage of your role playing experience do you want to be essentially almost like Farmville? You know what I'm saying? Like resource management, the game. Like, if you like read The Hobbit, right? There's like a whole bunch of shit in there about resource management. It's not specific, but it talks about fucking Bilbo was so fucking hungry because he didn't have any food left. He was just rubbing his pockets for crumbs and this kind of shit, But then in D&D, you're kind of like, it's almost like, who cares? You know what I'm saying? Like, are you gonna have us die of exposure out here, GM? Because if you are, just say so, and then we can just make new characters. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, it's almost like, did you fuck up so badly that the game master is not forgiving you and you're just going to die or from it, right? But I think in single sessions management, I think like what we're doing in Rot Marches, where like we are kind of giving the characters food, but if they fuck up, they're gonna have to deal with it. But there's also a mechanic about hunger and in there, right? But there's there is levels of exhaustion in D&D. Like, actually, we in the Eberron game we were playing, we pushed ourselves so much. We were climbing these stairs inside this goblin place so much that by the time we got back down the stairs, the game master's like, "Oh, you have a level of exhaustion," and then because we hadn't really stopped and ate, and then we got attacked. It didn't really mean anything at level 1 exhaustion, that's why I would have been like, no, fuck it. But because like level 2 is when you start taking minuses to your attack rolls, and then I was like, well, that's when it would have mattered. It would have mattered if you're like so tired that it's hard to swing your sword or whatever.
So what happens at level 1 exhaustion? You
get minuses on just like skill rolls. So like you can't think as well. Basically, you can't.
All right.
But like if we were in a skill challenge, that would have made a lot of sense. It would have made a lot of sense to be at that.
Yeah. Yeah, I can see it. I mean, overall, I feel like almost kind of like our take on this is that the process itself. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like there's almost an undercurrent of the process itself has the potential to be intensely tedious, right? Like, and
Absolutely.
the more you focus on it, the more tedious it's going to be. And nobody wants to do. And look. The reason I brought it up about the have you ever played in one of these games where they were like, where the GM was seriously like, count out your pennies. You know what I'm saying? Is I played in a game like that. I played in a game like that for quite a while, honestly, and it was, dude, it was grueling. It was like it was. I mean, not only was the experience of my character grueling because I had to be like foraging for survival in a state of nature pretty much constantly, but the actual process of playing the game was grueling. It was like late night sessions that would go on for 6+ hours, and this was when people were still smoking indoors, and my chest would feel horrible the next day from secondhand smoke, and there would be like navigation checks. There was one time that we were like in these mist enshrouded mountains, and we couldn't see anything for like as like a frame of reference, and so we had to make intuition based like navigation challenges, and the GM broke up how many feet, X number of feet we had to make the challenge. And this was using a D20 system, so if you failed a check, it influenced the next check, and it would allow you to get further and further and further off course because it was cascading, or rather kind of like intertwined results. I mean, I remember seriously a guy, he came to a session and he was like, I used a TI-85 calculator. This is a long time ago, guys. And I wrote a program so that we can just do all the rolls in one button. And the GM was like, no. The GM was like, I don't allow it because I did not write that program. I don't know what the fuck you wrote in there, and I want so start rolling those dice. And we were like, the check is like every 50 feet, you know, like every time we walk 50 feet, and we're trying to march 8 hours a day. Like, come on, you know. Anyway, it was.
So there'd be like whole sessions where all it was just these checks. Then I'm guessing if it
no,
was
literally
50.
there was 2 sessions where we would just nominate someone to roll the dice, and then they would sit there rolling the dice, and then we just go off and do other stuff. And the person who was rolling the die was having this ongoing conversation of like 15, 3, 10, 12. You know what I'm saying? It's just like
that could literally be like
maddening.
I mean, if you really wanted that, like, just the game master should have just rolled a list of, like like when you do perception checks, that people still do the perception checks in D&D. They'll like roll up a whole sheet of perception checks, and then just like, okay, that I use that perception check and slash and that, like.
Yeah.
Just
no. I mean,
why?
Yeah, this is one of the reasons. It's experiences like this that gave birth to like PBTA. Where it's like, oh, let's not spend 6 hours rolling dice. Let's roll 2d6, and then there's 3 options. Boom, boom, boom. And then choose from a list. Boom, boom, boom. And then let's move on to the thing that is what we want to do. Now, that having been said, I have vivid memories of this campaign, vivid, but
vivid scarring memories of this campaign.
It's alive in my imagination to this day.
But there is a game that I've always been interested in called Torchbearer that is kind of based on this idea. I've never got to play it, but it's sort of legendary in the kind of narrative game world. Is this kind of way to do dungeon crawling and have all this resource management be interesting.
Right.
But I've never played it, so I can't say too much, but I know that that's out there, and it sounds like the kind of game that game master would love and then hate because apparently it was too narrative. So
Torchbearer is not just resource management, but also, one of the resources that you manage, I believe, is stress, right? It's kind of like Darkest Dungeon in that way, where it's like the further. This is just my understanding. I've never played it either. There was a minute when it was like a really hot, third rail game, and you could get it really easily. And as we've kind of seen with third rail games, they kind of have a life cycle where they're hot for a minute and then they're kind of gone. You know what I'm saying? You don't hear about Torchbearer that much anymore. I'm sure it's out there. I'm sure it has a whole cult of devotees. I'm not talking shit on Torchbearer. I'm just saying I haven't heard about it as much recently as I did 2 years ago. But it's my understanding there's also a stress mechanic where it's the more you run out of shit, the more your stress goes up, which means that the less able to perform you are. So if you know you're on your last torch and you're in the lightless dungeon, then you're fucked. You know what I'm saying? You're like mentally fucked as well as being resource fucked. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and when I play games, I play them to escape, and all of that sounds like way too real to me. Where I'm like, I don't have enough resources, therefore I'm stressed, therefore I'm fucked. I'm like, that's my life, so I don't want to have to do that when I'm playing a game. That sounds awful.
Well, I mean, I can see like how it's all about the experience, right? Like riding on a roller coaster is like experiencing a bunch of like sudden falls and like weird velocity increases and decreases that you probably wouldn't want to subject yourself to if you were in a non-roller coaster situation. But like I can see where somebody might be thinking to themselves, I want to be immersed in how my character feels when they're in a dungeon, and I feel like I'm not actually immersed in that my experience of that is as a person who has an idea of what a dungeon is like because I looked at like some Larry Elmore drawings when I was 12. And like I understand the I understand where they came from when they wrote this game, but like you, Ashley, I don't have any desire to play this whatsoever. I did my first randomized dungeon crawl I can't remember in so long with the Esoteric Enterprises guys a couple days ago, and holy shit, what a completely different world that was. Get this. So I've been playing Esoteric Enterprises wrong the entire time. I did an interview with Emmy Allen that I need to fucking cut and put up on the channel, but basically I've been running Esoteric Enterprises like it's kind of like gangsters who live in a occult world. But what you literally are supposed to be doing is be playing homeless people. You're homeless people who have no recourse to society. And so you interact with this horrifying underworld in order to get resources to continue your existence, right? And so there's a lot of dungeon crawling in the way that the book is written. But I've just been running it like this fucking World of Darkness game where people just go to bars and talk and stuff like this. So I finally fucking ran a dungeon for my party, right? But we had sat down to play the game, and they had come to the mouth of the dungeon, and then life happened, and we literally didn't play for 2 months. And so we sat down to play again, and I could find the map with the tunnels and the rooms, but I had lost the key. The key was just gone. I was like going through all my notes. I couldn't find anything. So I literally had to tell them to talk amongst themselves and bust out one of the dungeon rollers from the inside of the Esoteric Enterprises book and then just re-roll the dungeon really fast. And it was pretty fun. It was pretty fun. I gotta say, usually dungeon crawls ain't my thing, but that was fun. That was a good time.
Yeah. And that's when you, as the GM, get to be a player, too, because you're like, I'm just as surprised as you guys is what you're going to run into. So this is going to be new for all of us.
Yeah, it makes it harder. Go ahead, Richard. I'm sorry.
Well, I was just going to say, like, that the dungeon as a travel log would be really interesting, I think. Like, kind of like the Underdark or whatever. Like doing like either like a road trip, basically essentially a road trip inside the dungeon, right? So you're going somewhere inside these caverns and caves and catacombs and built up environments would be really, I think, a really interesting game. And I'm sure that like you could call like Temple of Elemental Evil that, because you're essentially inside this dungeon the whole time, right? There's a city inside there and all that. But, there's a whole, like, world of these, like, road trip movies that I think would also be a lot of fun to, like, do, like, traveling. And I think you were going to even have something like that in your Ravenous game with the traveling between places kind of thing.
That's true. There is a travel element in that. Because to me, one of the fundamental aspects of the vampire, like, drama that you don't actually see in vampire role-playing games is that vampire movies are travel logs. Very often. Like, they all come from Dracula, but very many of them have this in there. The notion of the vampire as like a solitary being that like kind of lurks in a city forever is actually kind of new. Even if you read like Interview with a Vampire, it's like every few pages, it's like, then we took a ship to France. You know what I'm saying? And that's just kind of the way that the game, the way that the vampire narratives often kind of move.
If I were a vampire and could live forever, I would be traveling constantly. Like, I would not stay in the same place for long at all. So that makes sense. That's realistic to me.
Yeah. Yeah. And then a long time ago, it was much easier to do that. So, well, I guess it's pretty easy now, but, man, I had some fucking thought and then I lost it. Oh well, I guess we're all feeling that wrath tonight. So did we have anything further that we wanted to say on the? Oh, you were talking about the dungeon as travelogue, and I was gonna say, it sounds like a mega dungeon, what you're describing.
Yeah.
And there's a couple good ones out there, right? Of course.
Right.
The 13th Age, Eyes of the Stone Thief. Gareth Ryder Hanrahan.
Got it right back there.
Yeah, you could totally do it with that. And then there's, of course, it's like there's just a lot of mega dungeons out there. I'm sure fucking Monty Cook's Patolus could be used in that way.
Yes, you could.
Thanks, Monty.
Thanks, Monty.
Yeah. Thanks, bro. And then there's the Underdark campaign. Like it sounded, there was a moment when I felt like what you were describing sounded a lot like Out of the Abyss. The D&D campaign, which has a very kind of caverny travelogue feel to it that I don't think I captured very well when I was running it fucking 5 years ago now. Yeah, that's how long it's been since I've done D&D. Because we have Tasha's Cauldron of Everything coming up here, don't we? As a deep dive
Yes,
soon.
we do. We should think about that. Anyways.
Yeah. It's gonna be back into D&D for the first time in a long time, and then with this new fucking Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft coming out, I don't really see how I can not buy that. So it'll be like returning to D&D for like the first time in a fucking hot minute, dude. Stoked on that. Did anybody have any other things they want to cover tonight?
One thing I did want to say also with travel sequences, if you have like a big bad that's going to be coming up and you want to be nice to your players and maybe give them an idea of what it's going to be, if they have to roll like a knowledge check or something like that, if you want to give a miniature version of that or like a book about it or something that they have to find on the side of the road somewhere, that could be a way that you do that too, is you find a stash that someone had dropped and it's got a book about it. And so if they decide to read that book, that will help them with identifying and defeating the big bad evil guy. So that's another thing that you can, like a little Easter egg for them or whatever. If you want
I always love when game masters give characters books and then they don't read them. Yeah. Because that happened in Eternal Lies. That happened in Eternal Lies, and we were like,
do they ever read them?
No.
Yeah. Just a random book.
I couldn't tell you how many times as a fucking vampire GM I was like, and then you find a leather-bound grimoire, and it's super enrapturing, and the player goes, okay, cool, I put it in my bag. And you're like, all right.
How much gold is it worth?
Yeah. I'm like, fuck you guys. You fucking... I don't know why I do this game. It's funny because... like, we're talking about this, and you're kind of like, guys are reminding me, like, some of my big pet peeves with the kind of games you put a lot of work into. Ever since we started Full Metal RPG, like, there's just been, like, kind of like this graph of, like, the amount of effort that I put into an individual session that has just been trending downwards at a very steady pace for years, because... with Full Metal RPG has come like all sorts of other responsibilities, and there's just all sorts of other just constantly they just sort of sprout like mushrooms in the night. And I haven't really had a campaign that I've just felt like very like dedicated and invested in like writing it and writing the background and writing the fucking descriptions of the buildings and all this shit and immersing myself in. I haven't done that in fucking years, and I really want to. I've been like working on this mage campaign that I want to run, and
did someone say mage?
Yeah, mage, mage the Ascension, yeah. And I'm like, oh man, why did I ever give this up? This is so cool. This is so fun. And it's like, that's why I gave it up. Because you say you find the leather-bound grimoire, and they go, yeah, okay, whatever. I don't give a fuck about that. Don't you know that my character doesn't give a fuck about grimoires? And you're like, anyway.
I think that's I think everybody has people that are in that phase of life that you're like I'm just here for the trench coats and katanas, motherfucker. Like, like not this books. Like I have to read books at school, man. Like fuck you. Like
my character doesn't read books, dude. My character wears sunglasses at night.
I play Blade. I basically play Blade. So yes.
Well, what do you think, ladies and gentlemen? Do we want to make some closing comments?
Yeah, sounds good.
Yeah,
Mr. Buzzkill, why don't you take us out?
Of the travel sequences, well, let's get to our destination here on travel sequences. I think they're fun. They can be fun, but you have to read the table. Like most things, you have to read the table, and I think it's a good opportunity for world building. Like, you spend all this time as a game master, like thinking about this world, even when you only use minimal effort, like just to set up a session, you're still thinking about the world. Like I still spent a lot of time thinking about the world, even though I didn't really spend a lot of time prepping for my session. So like, that's the time to bring some of that and put it on the table, and it'll inspire some role playing by the characters, as with all things.
No doubt. And with that, I guess we'll call it another episode of Full Metal RPG. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. You can find us, fullmetalrpg.com will lead you to our link tree, and you can get into all the stuff that we're into. We got all kinds of stuff on there. We got T-shirts. We got Discords. We got this Patreon shit. So if you want to play, if you've listened to our stories of the Rot Marches and you're thinking to yourself, you know what, I'd love to fucking play the Rot Marches for as little as $1 a month, you could join us in this sandbox campaign style of adventure exploration that we've never done before, and we're kind of learning it as we're doing it, and we're kind of making it up as we go along. And I gotta say, we're at the spot where we're actually starting to get into returns on some of that, and it's really fun. It's really awesome. It's easy to get jacked up about Rot Marches. Yeah, I'm sure I had some other thought, but my synapses are just like really ceasing to fire here at this point. Thanks for joining us. Am I missing something?
No, I think you're good.
I just have this feeling like I had some like, it's back. This is where I'm at.
All right.
So I downloaded a new fucking OS or whatever for my phone for like the first time in like 3 years. My phone's always popping this thing up. It's like, download the new OS. I'm like, shut up, phone. I don't care about you. So I finally got around to doing it. It was plugged in at night or something. And guess what, kids? Uncle Brendan didn't know this, but iTunes changed how the podcast app works, and it's very different now. At least for me. It's probably the same as it's been for you for like a year or something, but for me, it's very, very brand new. And it turns out that the way that it displays podcasts is a little bit more important than it was 5 years ago. So what we really need for you to do is go on and like and subscribe and all that shit, but please leave us a 5-star review. Please write a little bit of something in there. Let people know how to find the podcast, because right now, the way that iTunes works is it really pushing podcasts into your face when you boot up the app, rather than them just being in the background like they were for years and years and years. So that is a level of exposure that we still really need, and that helps more people get in touch with the show. Go ahead, Richard. And
if you're not an Apple fanboy, there are many other apps that also take reviews, like Stitcher and Pod Addict and a bunch of other ones. So
probably Podbean.
Podbean?
Yeah, Podbean.
Review our stuff for us, please. It helps us a lot. If you can't support us and be one of our bosses, our patrons, our mighty patrons, help us out and give us a review. That's all. Please.
That'd be pretty fucking sick. No lie. And then I'll sing your praises on the show. Like
we'll read them. Like, tell, and if we don't read them, like, get at us and tell us we should read them. Like,
yeah, exactly. We will definitely get around to reading them because we've read them all.
Yes,
all of them.
Yep.
Good, bad,
all right.
We read them all.
Exactly.
Any of them.
All right. Well, thank you very much for spending another evening with Full Metal RPG. Have a good night.
Bye.
Brah.